Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are doing the Invisible Man. Now, back when I made my Predator build with Private Noodles, we went for a focus on the spell Greater Invisibility, and trying to kind of mix a Gloomstalker Ranger and an Illusion Wizard to kind of create a stealth fighter. But then I thought to myself, you know, how far can I actually push invisibility in this game? Specifically Greater Invisibility, because, you know, that is the invisibility spell will let you stay invisible even after you make an action. However, there is a lot of room for the base invisibility spell as well. So I was kind of thinking, like, how do I actually maximize and optimize this, and how do I create an interesting build around it? And, well, I feel like I found something that is really, really cool. Now, to start things off, you are going to need to play as a Duegar. This is, well, it is optional, but not really, as it's going to give you a special version of the invisibility spell that can be cast as many times as you like in a day, and does not have the 10 turn duration limit. It lasts until a long rest, which means once you hit level 5 as a Duegar, you can basically be permanently invisible. Now, I'm obviously not the first person to probably do a build like this, but I do think I kind of have an interesting idea for like the actual character that this build would be, and I wanted to still present it to you guys kind of in video format because I feel like it would be a very interesting basis for a playthrough that is going to feel very, very different from a standard playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, and I'll kind of get into why as we go. So, I envision this character as being a follower of the Duegar in some sense, or Duegar, or whatever the Duegar deity is called. Basically, from my understanding of that, he is basically the Duegar kind of is basically the god of the Duegar, and his most highest esteemed followers basically rule over the other Duegar. And I don't think this guy is going to be maybe one of the higher ranked guys kind of on the food chain. I absolutely think that he would be an agent of the Duegar and his, you know, highest court of followers. I feel like he would be one of the greatest assassins in the Underdark, basically honing his innate racial ability to become invisible to its finest point, allowing him to basically be invisible all the time and take massive advantage of it to carry out assassinations against the enemies of the Duegar, both in the Underdark and the surface. Now, this means you could play this character as a Dark Urge if you wanted to, and it would work perfectly fine because you would get something as something like the Deathstalker Mantle, which will let you turn invisible after, you know, killing enemies. But I didn't actually feel like that cloak was necessary enough to warrant, you know, going down that path. So I've gone with something a little bit different. I've gone with a regular avatar character with the Urchin background, just to give us stealth and sleight of hand proficiency without needing to take it as part of our class. So let's just get into the build. Obviously, like I said, we're playing as a Duegar, and we're going to be starting off as a Bard. The best way to get the highest possible stealth and get greater invisibility as early as possible is to play a Bard, because that means you can get it at level 7 and pick up expertise in stealth along the way, but we'll get to that when we come to it. So I don't really see this guy as a primary caster, so it's up to you kind of what spells you take. We're mainly going to be using utility spells, and since a lot of Bard spells are concentration based as well, but we're going to be wanting to concentrate on our invisibility spells pretty much all the time. It does quite greatly limit our options for spells, but again, Bard is the quickest way to get there with the highest possible stealth, so that's why I've gone this round. So I'm just going with Vicious Mockery and Friends. It is pretty standard, but again, if you wanted to drop down your Charisma to something a bit lower and instead go with something other than Vicious Mockery, you absolutely could. I'm also going to be taking some of our utility spells, that being Longstrider, because we are a Duegar, we're a dwarf, we have lower movement speed by default, we want to bump that up. Featherfall to be able to get around the map. I am building this character to be able to jump around the map as well, and get a bunch of vertical mobility, so having Featherfall is going to be super useful. And Disguise Self makes a ton of sense for a character like this. Being able to disguise yourself as other races, especially while on the surface, is going to be super helpful for getting around unnoticed. I've just realized I've kind of made like 2 bards in a row that like focus kind of on like deception and like not wanting to be found. That's kind of odd that that's kind of happened. But anyways, so yeah, Disguise Self is going to be the last spell. As for your starting instrument, I've gone with a drum, although I'd probably instantly take the instrument off. to use the whistle, because I don't know, have any of you guys seen Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and you know how Death like kind of had that whistle that accompanied his arrival? Imagine just hearing whistling out of nowhere, like you cannot find the source, and then someone in the room just dies. That would be terrifying, and I think is probably what would make this guy sort of an Underdark legend. As for your ability scores, this is going to look a bit strange, but bear with me. But really, the only thing you need is your dexterity at 17, because again, we're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. So the rest of your stats can kind of be whatever you want. Yes, Charisma is our primary spellcasting stat, but since we're mainly going to be packing utility spells, it honestly doesn't need to be that high. In fact, I would say Constitution should really be your second highest stat, giving you a bunch more HP. But if you wanted to kind of play around with these stats and get higher soft stats and the like, you absolutely can. Now, as I said before, we've got Sleight of Hand and Stealth for our proficiencies, so because Bard gives you 3 of anything, pretty much, you can just pick whatever you like. It really doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep our social skills there being Deception, Performance, and Persuasion. We are a Bard at the end of the day, so Performance would be nice to have, but if you feel like it's not really fitting for this character, go with Intimidation just to have the full kind of social skill set, meaning that you can absolutely, you know, especially when you're using your disguised self, be able to talk your way out of pretty much any situation. At Bard level 2, we're going to be getting all the standard Bard stuff. I'll go over it quickly. Jack of all trades is going to add half your proficiency bonus to any ability checks you're not proficient in. Awesome. If you wanted to round out these stats a bit more, you'd actually get a lot more out of this feature. We're also going to get Song of Rest, allowing us to take 3 short rests. Awesome. We're also going to gain another spell, and this really is a take whatever you like kind of thing. I'm personally going to go with Speak of Animals just to get those dialogue options, but you can take whatever you like here. Next up at Bard level 3, we are going to be choosing our subclass. Now, I am going to say that this doesn't actually hugely matter what you take here. If you feel like going with that whole whistling thing and using your voice as a weapon, College of Law can work quite well. You get extra proficiencies and magical secrets. If you want to go with an ability to kind of like support your allies while remaining invisible, you could go with College of Valor. But of course, I'm going with College of Swords. And again, I've built 2 College of Swords bards back to back. But I think this does speak to how versatile College of Swords really is, because we've been able to make 2 builds in a row with College of Swords that are completely different from each other. One being a heavy armor wielding, up close, divine smiting guy, and another one who is an invisible passive one-shot, like, kind of stabby dude who remains invisible. So it's actually quite interesting that Swordsbard is this versatile. But of course it means we're going to get our Blade Flourishes, as you know, and the fighting style. And it's entirely up to you, but I am going to be going with 2-weapon fighting since I am going to be using an offhand weapon, although you can't see it here. And that offhand weapon is going to be extremely important, and we're always going to have it on, so we might as well just get a little bit of extra damage with our bonus attacks if we want it. We're also going to be able to get level 2 spells at this point, and since we're not at level 5 yet and don't actually have invisibility, it does make sense to take the invisibility spell here, but obviously once you reach level 5 total, you can respec and swap this out. We also are going to get Enlarge as our racial feature, allowing us to grow in size and become stronger, giving us advantage on ability checks and saving throws using strength, and our weapon attacks deal an additional 1d4 damage. I've got to kind of make a build around Enlarge Reduce one day. It seems like a really fun spell to mess around with. At Bard level 4, we are going to be grabbing our first feat, and I want to grab a half feat like I said, and we are grabbing Athlete. I feel like this guy, as an assassin, would be very nimble despite his stature, and I want to be able to jump around the map so that in tandem with our invisibility and high maneuverability, we can basically get into any position we like before combat, or just avoid it entirely. That's one of the interesting things about this build, is that you can actually basically choose your combat encounters and be able to set up yourself perfectly before you strike. As for our cantrips, we can kind of choose whatever you like here, it really doesn't matter. Mage Hand or Minor Illusion would actually be super on theme here, as Mage Hand would allow you to activate things from a distance while still being able to kind of be out of the way, and also Minor Illusion would kind of allow you to distract enemies and pull them away from the fight whilst remaining invisible before you strike them down, so it's entirely up to you. As for our spells, now again, we're kind of limited in our options here, because obviously we don't want anything that's going to take our concentration, really, as that's going to break our invisibility, so unfortunately we're very limited. Knock could work, but we're already going to have super high sleight of hand, so it feels kind of unnecessary. See Invisibility, it says it doesn't take concentration here, so that actually might make a lot of sense to take See Invisibility, because if you're so good at being invisible, you probably would notice when someone else is doing it, because they're probably doing it worse than you. At Bard level 5, we're going to be getting our Font of Inspiration, meaning that we now recover our Bardic Inspiration on a short rest, and we also gain a bump up to our Bardic Inspiration, increasing it to a D8, meaning our Blade Flourishes are going to be a bit more powerful. We also are going to get level 3 spells at this point, and again, there's not many things that work that aren't going to take our concentration, so something like Glyph of Warding can work really well here. Again, since we're invisible all the time, we could easily set this up and be able to trap people and trap an arena without being noticed, starting combat, and then all of our enemies will funnel into the traps and take a ton of damage. And because now we are total level 5, we get the cornerstone of this build, Invisibility from the Duegar race. So what this means is we become invisible until a long rest, and it ends early if we attack, cast another spell, take an action, or take damage. It uses our concentration, but it says it's once per battle, but if we're not in battle yet, that means we can use it as much as we like, so it's pretty damn good. At Bard level 6, we're going to be getting something super important. Because we went with Swords Bard, we are going to be getting extra attack, meaning that we're going to be able to make more attacks in a single turn, meaning that we're going to get more use out of our Greater Invisibility turns because they are limited. We are going to get another spell at this point, and again, nothing really stands out to me. If you feel like you want an offensive spell, something like Shatter or Thunder Wave could really work, but again, most of these things are going to take your concentration, so they don't really work. Take a healing spell if you'd like, it's entirely up to you. You could take Knock if you want to kind of fulfill that get that last slot. I can see Enhance Ability, but again, when you're going to want to be invisible as much as you can, even though, yes, this will kind of work outside of combat, I feel like the whole point of this build is to just be invisible as much as you can, so swapping it out for Enhanced Ability randomly just feels kind of So I think I'm just going to go with Shatter. I think, although Feign Death doesn't use it either, but it feels a bit pointless, so I think I'm just going to go with Shatter, so we have a ranged magic option if we need it. At Bard level 7, we're finally going to be getting what we came here for, level 4 spells, which means Greater Invisibility. Turn a creature invisible. Attacks against it have disadvantage. It attacks with advantage. Invisibility breaks when you fail increasingly harder stealth checks on attacking, casting spells, or interacting with items, and it lasts for 10 turns. This means that we can stay invisible while being able to attack and do other things, and because we're going to have such high stealth with this build, we're going to be able to maintain Greater Invisibility for a lot longer than normal. You will see in the combat footage how long I actually mean. And finally, with Bard level 8, I'm going to take it to level 8 just so we can get that extra feat, but you might find that you might get something out of a quick level dip somewhere else. But I feel like we can just grab another useful spell here, that being Freedom of Movement or Dimension Door. Dimension Door would allow you to teleport yourself and one adjacent ally to a place you can see. However, I feel like if you are playing this build, you're probably going to want to be scouting ahead a lot of the time, and I don't think you really want to be taxiing your allies around when you're trying to get up and close and personal. So I feel like Freedom of Movement, just being able to cast it at the start of the day and get a bunch more movement and be immune to being stunned and paralyzed or restrained, can be super useful. But again, you might not even find that to be too useful and just want a basic healing spell, but I'll go with Freedom of Movement for now. And of course, we're going to be getting another feat, which means we're taking an ability score improvement and bumping up our dexterity to 20 to get the highest possible stealth checks that we can get. Now, at this point, you have basically any option you'd like. You can go all the way in Bard. You can multi-class into pretty much anything. I mean, we've got what we came here for. The level 8 Bard to get Greater Invisibility and 2 feats and a bunch of other stuff that can be useful. So really, from this point, the world is your oyster. I would say this build is complete as of level 8 Bard. However, I will be showing one possible option for your multi-class, and I think it is pretty obvious, but I think I would show it off anyway. But as far as I'm concerned, this build is pretty much done. But let's jump over to Rogue. You saw this coming. Because we are going to be using short swords, that being finesse weapons, we are going to be getting a bonus out of sneak attack. And since being invisible means we're always going to pretty much have advantage, sneak attack is going to go off all the time, which is awesome, that extra damage. And I believe sneak damage can trigger on blade flourishes, so you can really stack up that damage. We're also going to be able to get 1 proficiency and 2 expertise, and it's entirely up to you what you want to grab. I will probably take expertise. Wait, did I not grab expertise and stealth as a bard? I forgot to do that. Oh, darn it. Okay, so at level 3 of Bard, you're supposed to take expertise. Oh, I'm such a moron. I'll have an edit in the video, but I'm so stupid. But yes, we were supposed to grab stealth in expertise at level 3 of Bard, but we've got it here anyway. I cannot believe I forgot that. Oh, that's just the hobo way. That's just how we do things on this channel. Wing it. And make mistakes the whole time. Level 2 of Bard is going to give us our bonus action dash, which is going to be awesome for getting around the battlefield. Again, as a dwarf, we have stubby legs, so this plus long strider is really going to help. I still can't believe I forgot to get expertise and stuff. The one most important thing that we were supposed to do. I'm such an idiot. Now, again, as for our subclass, I mean, Thief would obviously work. We are dual wielding. We'd get that extra attack, but that's boring. I want to go with Assassin. We're going to get a few things out of this. You are the deadliest against unprepared enemies. In combat, you have advantage on attack rolls against creatures that haven't taken a turn yet. We technically already get advantage on attack rolls because we're being invisible, so this isn't as useful. But hey-ho, if you're regular invisible and then you come out of invisibility, you can still make your second attack with advantage. So that works. Assassin Ambush. Any successful attack roll against a surprise creature is a critical hit. This is also super good. If you cast Greater Invisibility before going in, you can kind of get multiple people really quickly and just get multiple critical hits off, which can work really well. And then finally, Assassin's Alacrity. Now, for the longest time, I could not fathom the use of this subclass feature, because I'm like, well, every time I enter combat, I've never used my action or bonus action. I never really understood it. And then I realized people play in turn-based mode outside of combat. So this actually does make sense to have here, and I feel like you would do this with this build. Because say you went into turn-based mode, cast Greater Invisibility to get into combat and be able to attack while remaining, stealthy. As soon as combat, so obviously when you attack using your action while invisible, before combat starts, you could attack and then immediately be able to gain another action again. So you'll be able to get more attacks on that opening round. So it totally makes sense to actually go with this subclass, as all of these features can be useful in their own way, and will allow you to get some pretty high damage. And finally, at Rogue level 4, we are going to be getting our final feat of the build, and it is entirely up to you what you would like to take. You could grab another ability score improvement to bump up some stats, but I'm personally going to be taking the mobile feat. Again, I want this build to be extremely maneuverable, and taking mobile is obviously going to increase our movement speed and allow us to ignore difficult terrain when we dash. So I feel like it's worth picking up, but it's entirely up to you if you can think of something better. Sharpshooter might work. I actually do have some crossbows on this build since we can use them, so if you feel like Sharpshooter would work well for you, absolutely go ahead. But I like the idea of this guy being an up-close stabby dude rather than just a crossbow shooter, but honestly, take whatever you like. And that is the build. So what you're going to be getting out of this build is the ability to pretty much remain invisible all of the time, and be able to take full advantage of that invisibility whenever you get the chance. Being able to get a lot of critical hits with the Assassin feature, being able to get advantage on all of your attacks, allowing you to trigger sneak attack, and being able to pick and choose any combat encounter. You can sneak right through pretty much anything, or set yourself up into the perfect position to be able to do a ton of damage off the bat, or set things up like Glyph of Warding all over the place to be able to put up a ton of traps down and control the battlefield. I can even see this character working extremely well in kind of a lone wolf playthrough, allowing you to, again, pick and choose your combat encounters, being able to sneak through whatever you don't want to fight, and also being able to kind of pick enemies off one by one, luring them away from the battlefield while remaining invisible, and taking them out without their friends getting too involved. I think this build works out pretty nicely, and I would encourage anybody to kind of give this playstyle a try, because it is going to feel very different than your standard Baldur's Gate run. But let's get into the equipment, which is super important. So, let's get into the weapons first, because I believe they are the most important. The most important being the Assassin's Short Sword. This is a short sword that can go in an offhand because it's light, and it gives us advantage on stealth checks passively as long as we have the weapon equipped. This is huge. With our massive stealth stat of 13, getting advantage on this means we're going to be absolutely insane at stealth checks, meaning that we're barely going to fail our greater invisibility maintaining checks, so this is super good to have. Now, I did originally consider going with Lightfoot Halfling, so we didn't have to use this weapon, but getting that permanent invisibility from the Duegar just felt too good. And then, of course, our main hand weapon is going to be the Knife of the Undermountain King, allowing us to roll a critical hit a little bit easier by reducing the threshold by 1. This effect can stack as well, and I swear the tooltip never used to say that, but it does now as of patch 4, so yes, the Knife of the Undermountain King does stack. When you roll 2 damage or less, re-roll the dice, taking the highest result, meaning that we're going to be consistently getting super high damage with this weapon. We also have Shadow Blade. You have advantage on attack rolls against slightly or heavily obscured targets when using this blade. Entirely useless to us because we're going to be invisible most of the time, meaning that we're pretty much always going to have advantage. But this is one of the better short swords you can get. You can get both of these fairly early on. I believe you get this one in Act 1 and this one in Act 2, meaning that this playstyle can come online really quickly. But we also have the standard dual setup crossbow, being the Hellfire hand crossbow and the Near Misser, because since we grab 2-weapon fighting, we can use dual crossbows pretty effectively, again getting advantage on all of our attacks. So if you took the sharpshooter feat, you could actually build around it, maybe getting some things to offset that penalty, and using advantage to truly basically feel like you're never going to miss your sharpshooter attacks, making this build super strong. But I wanted to focus on something other than that. Let's get into the armor now. So first off, we have the Covert Cowl. While obscured, the number you need to roll a critical hit while attacking is reduced by 1. Since we're using the Undermountain King and this effect will stack with it, we might as well pick it up, and I think it looks absolutely awesome fashion-wise for a build like this. However, I must note, being obscured and being invisible are not the same thing. You can be invisible but not be obscured because you might be standing in bright light, so even though the enemies can't see you, you're not obscured. It's weird. But as long as you're kind of in interior environments and sneaking, you should be able to get this off pretty easily. But it is stupid that obscured and invisibility are not the same thing. I've got the Cloak of Displacement here. At the beginning of the wearer's turn, the cloak activates, granting enemies disadvantage on attack rolls against the wearer. This effect lasts until the wearer takes damage. This essentially means that after we lose our invisibility, we're still going to be super hard to hit, kind of getting a half invisibility, as you kind of get that blur effect. It felt super on theme here. Unfortunately, you don't get this until Act 3, but I figured I'd still include it because I think it looks pretty awesome. But of course, if you do decide to go for Dark Urge, the Deathstalker Mantle is going to work out pretty nicely, because it is going to allow you to become invisible whenever you kill an enemy, allowing you to keep it up, and you get this really early into the run, so it could be your primary source of invisibility before you reach level 5. So it's definitely worth noting if you want to play this as a Dark Urge. Now, next up, we have the Ballist Armor. Enemies within you get this in Act 3. Enemies within 2 meters become vulnerable to piercing damage, meaning that all of our short sword attacks are going to deal double damage, which is huge. And you also get a +2 bonus to initiative rolls, allowing you to stay ahead of the curve in fights. Now, of course, you only get this in Act 3, so I've come up with a few alternatives. Another Act 3 alternative, if you don't want to play this as an evil character for some reason, would be the Elegant Studded Leather. It still gives you that +2 bonus to initiative rolls, but this also gives you advantage on stealth checks, so then you could drop the Assassin's Short Sword for something better if you wanted, if you don't care about the vulnerability, but I quite like it. And you also get to cast Shield once per short rest, which could be super useful if you do end up dropping that invisibility. But I do prefer the Ballist Armor overall for that higher damage through vulnerability. But for some early game options, we have 2 Act 1 options here, and it depends on what you're doing. First up is the Drow Studded Leather. This can just be obtained in the Underdark, and will give you a +1 bonus to stealth checks, making it a little bit higher, but it's just a solid option for getting that slightly better stealth in the early game. And the other option is the Spider Silk Armor, which is a slightly better version of the Drow Studded Leather, because in addition to the +1 stealth check bonus, you also get advantage on Constitution saving throw checks, meaning that if you somehow get hit while invisible, you have a higher chance of maintaining that concentration to keep it up. But the caveat being that if you want to play a more evil character, you only get the Spider Silk Armor for early on if you kill Minthara, which obviously you wouldn't want to do if you wanted to recruit her in an evil campaign. So that's why I included the Drow Studded Leather as an option. But of course, you can just get the Spider Silk Armor off of her once you recruit her in Act 2, and then obviously swap it out for the Ballist Armor later. But that's kind of why I wanted to show all of those potential options off, because there is a lot of wiggle room with this build as far as what you want to grab. But I personally prefer the Ballist Armor. Next up we have the Wanderer's Gloves. Now, this is kind of a meh pick. I just needed something to fill this slot that I felt looked good with the fashion. But you could get something like the Crater Flesh Gloves if you wanted to, like, get higher sneak attack damage or something like that. But let's look at the Wanderer's Gloves for now. Your armor class increases by 1. Awesome. A flat bonus to our armor class is always welcome. And if you have Bardic Inspiration, you gain an additional use of it, meaning that for this build, we're also going to be getting an extra bit of Bardic Inspiration, which means an extra Blade Flourish per long rest. So, another Blade Flourish and armor class, and gloves that can be obtained early on in the game. This is a super solid option for this build, and I'm actually really happy I went with it. And finally, the Disintegrating Knife Walkers, because they let you cast Misty Step and you cannot be enwebbed, entangled, or ensnared, and cannot slip on grease or ice. These can be obtained in Act 1 fairly easily and are one of the strongest boot options in the game. Burger King Foot Lettuce. I'm sorry. God, if any... I wonder how many people actually know that meme. That meme's old. I know, it's a boring pick, but it is one of the best ones that fit really thematically for this build. I can totally see this character having slain a high-ranking Drow officer, well, that being Nair, in order to obtain these, and, like, kind of, I felt like that felt on theme for the build and, like, kind of the backstory, so I wanted to go with them anyway. Yes, I know it's boring. No, I don't really care, because they were too perfect not to grab. I've gone for the Amulet of Branding. If you decide you don't want to go with the Ballast Armor, but you still want to be able to get vulnerability to piercing damage, this is a solid option. You can obtain this from the Crash, and for 3 turns, once per long rest, you can mark an enemy and make them vulnerable to bludgeoning, slashing, or piercing damage, which is what we would go with. Basically meaning that you can get a slightly weaker version of the Ballast Armor, kind of ability fairly early on in the game, and so it makes this build a little bit more flexible and makes this kind of like a boss beater. You can lure away the main guy and then kill him a lot easier with this feature. Next up, we have the Shapeshifter's Boonring, a bit of an odd pick, but I do feel like this character would use Disguise Self quite a lot, as I said, so I feel like if you wanted to really roleplay that, having the Shapeshifter's Boonring to be able to give yourself a plus 1d4 bonus to all checks while having Disguise Self up, it just felt really thematic and like on theme, and I really wanted to like give it a show off here because I feel like it would make so much sense for this build roleplay wise. And finally, the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. Now, this has a unique aspect. This adds a unique aspect to this playstyle, and kind of lets you have a big kind of turn 1 setup that you normally wouldn't be able to get. So, after hitting a creature with a weapon attack, you can cast illusion or enchantment spells as a bonus action. Obviously, invisibility is can basically be cast as a bonus action with this spell. But I know what you're thinking. But why would we ever bother to do this? We're pretty much going to be staying invisible all the time, and we'll want to cast greater invisibility before we go into battle anyway. So what's the point? Well, picture this. You can kind of save yourself a little bit of trouble. If you go, if you're basically under the permanent invisibility from the Duegar already, and you want to go into combat, but you don't want to faff about with, going greater invisibility and blah, 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 you can basically just walk into combat, do your first 2 attacks if you're attacking your extra attack, then cast greater invisibility as a bonus action, and kind of extending the duration of that spell a little bit longer. Giving you a slightly, and not getting those first 2 checks that are going to make the subsequent checks harder, because obviously if you go in with greater invisibility first, do 2 attacks, you're already making those subsequent checks really hard. So basically you can kind of get a couple of extra free turns out of greater invisibility, or a couple of extra free attacks, I apologize, basically by kind of using this strategy. So I feel like it actually does work pretty well, so I felt like it was worth mentioning it here. But an alternative would be the Smuggler's Ring. Again, if you're mainly focusing on utility spells, yes, this lowers charisma, but it doesn't really matter, again, if we're mostly focusing on utility. So essentially getting a +2 to our stealth and sleight of hand for free is pretty good. So I would actually recommend trying this if you find that the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel isn't really working, or just pick this up in Act 1 anyway, and then because you only get the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel in Act 3, unfortunately. So this is a solid option that you can get super early on in the game and will work throughout the whole game for you. I'll go invisible just to kind of show you. Boom. You cannot see him. Totally can't see this, like, ghost standing in the corner. Anyways, that is everything, I think. Overall, this is a super unique and fun playstyle that is going to completely change the way you play Baldur's Gate 3. Entirely. So, really, you're going to want to kind of play this character as a bit of a lone wolf, or at least a scout. Whenever you think, if you're playing as a lone wolf, just kind of sneak through combat encounters and do whatever you like. But if you wanted to play this character as a scout, basically separating this character from the party, sending them out to scout out dangerous areas, maybe take out a few stragglers before the rest of the party comes in. It could be a super fun way to play. And again, if you could play this as more of an evil character, teaming up with like Minthara and like Astarion and Shadowheart to be able to do all sorts of like fun kind of stuff with that. Again, I feel like this is going to be a super fun and interesting playstyle that you won't really be able to replicate anywhere else. So I highly encourage you to check out this build, even if just for fun. Maybe respec a character that's already in maybe one of the later acts and just mess around with it, and especially in Act 3, you're going to have a ton of fun. So anyways, I guess I'll get into some housekeeping stuff. Yesterday's video. What the hell happened? I must have struck gold with that concept, and I think the thumbnail really helped, because that thumbnail shot was awesome, in my opinion. That video was my fastest growing video ever. No video of mine has ever hit that many views that quickly. I think it's currently sitting at like nearly 8,000 in like about a day's worth of time, which is a flat out new record for any of my build videos. The only time it was ever surpassed was from my quick look at patch 4, which I don't really count because that was like not a build video, whereas this is. So seriously, thank you guys for that, because that was so cool to see a build that I was really proud of do so well. And again, I think that might just be one of my favorite builds, and I see a lot of people saying they wanted to like splash it on Lae'zel or Shadowheart, which is awesome. That's basically a really good idea for that build. So thank you so much for watching that. I'm glad everyone really enjoyed it. Again, I got some more stuff cooking for this week. Obviously, this video was really fun to do as well. I'm also quite looking forward to the build I've got coming out tomorrow. I think it's going to be a super fun playstyle as well that I hope you guys like. And again, there's not really much else going on. I kind of asked you guys about potential video ideas for stuff outside of just Baldur's Gate 3 build videos, and a lot of you said you would like to see me actually play through the game, which, don't get me wrong, I'd love to do. But, I mean, it's really tricky, because where I make these videos every single day, if I was to start doing playthrough videos, I would have to kind of delay my upload schedule, which I don't really want to do at the moment. I quite like this momentum that I have. Maybe I could try recording on the weekends, maybe stop uploading on the weekends, just record a playthrough, and then maybe upload a playthrough or like some sort of other video every few weeks. Or I could attempt live streaming. Now, I'm not 100% sure how that would go. That wouldn't be a consistent thing, but I have had an idea for a live stream that I would want to try. And if there's enough interest in that, I might do that this Saturday or Sunday. My only kind of caveat is that, again, a lot of my viewer base is American, so if I was to stream, I would most likely be at a very awkward time for the majority of my fan base. Fan base, God, I don't like using that word. I don't want to say fan base. Viewer base? Subscriber base? I don't know. Fan base is weird. I don't like that term. That makes me feel like an influencer. Ugh, that's yucky as hell. No, viewer base. Yeah, we'll call it viewer base. It would be a weird time for a lot of my viewer base. So let me know if a live stream of me playing through a game with like with one of my builds, or maybe like a challenge run idea that I have in mind, or maybe something new that you guys haven't seen yet. Let me know. I would be interested in checking it out. Another thing you guys kind of suggested was maybe perhaps doing modded builds, or at least builds that use the mod that lets you go up to level 20 to see kind of like what the difference would be. And while that is an interesting idea, I'm not entirely sure if I want to go down that route yet, because again, I think I've said this quite a few times, but if I do modded builds, that is going to isolate a huge amount of A, my viewer base, and B, the Baldur's Gate community who are playing on console. So I don't really want to start making builds that only a small percentage of the actual player base could make. So I kind of want to stick to unmodded builds for now, but don't get me wrong, that might definitely be something I do as a bonus in the future. And is there anything else? I don't think so. I think I'm good. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for your support, and I will see you all next time. No, I did not mean to open the Epic Games Store. I meant to stop recording.